Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Cool. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Really excited to have you all here today. We'll do a quick round of intros. I'm Shannon Ogborn. I will be hosting this session with our guest, JT. I will let him introduce himself, but I will start by introducing myself. I lead community and recruiting advisory for Ashby in the Americas. I was a former recruiter myself, which is how JT and I came across each other many years ago, almost 10 years ago, I think, to be exact. And so I feel really passionately about bringing these conversations to our community so that we can be more strategic leaders and recruiters. So JT, go for it.
Hey, Shannon, thank you for having me. Hi, everybody. I'm JT Haskell. I've been head of talent at a lot of startups and a lot of big companies over the years. And most recently with Reddit, with the IPO that we had this year, which was an amazing event. I'm currently taking the summer off and enjoying it and doing some fractional work for a couple of startups. And we'll start figuring out my next role pretty soon here. For the time being, though, it's been fun just helping out a couple of other companies figure out how to hire faster and do fun things like this with Team Ashby.
Amazing. Thank you so much, JT. So just a couple of housekeeping things. You will see in the bottom right-hand corner, obviously many of you have found the chat. Would love for anyone who just came in to put where they are joining from and what their role is. And then if you look further left on that right corner, there's a questions tab. That is how we are going to be prioritizing questions. So put your questions in there if you have any, and also use that area to upvote the questions, and we will prioritize accordingly. We have about 30 minutes to go through the content, and then we have reserved an extra 15 minutes for any lingering questions that we may not get to during. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can during the session. And then we do have that buffer time for after. Just a quick agenda of what we're going to go through today. JT is going to walk us through some of the more high-level insights. If you didn't catch his episode of our Offer Accepted podcast, it's kind of a little bit of a rehash of that. And then he is going to give us a full demonstration of kind of how he does his capacity modeling. So really, really excited for that. So sort of first things first, wanted to just take a big step back, and I would love, JT, if you could help us understand the why. Why should people create and manage a capacity plan and model?
Sure. There's lots of reasons for this. For many years working for pretty fast-growing VC-backed companies, I didn't find a lot of value out of doing this. And I wish I had taken the time to do so, because there actually is a lot of value, particularly when you're scaling quickly, to understand that you have enough team to actually hit the numbers you need to hit to make the board and everyone else happy. So for starting from the top down, the executives need to know when their team is going to be available to actually start doing the work. And if you can present them a forecast against the capacity that you have, you can actually hit those numbers pretty accurately and come to terms and sometimes negotiate on when positions are open and when some won't. Some backfills that needed to be reprioritized ahead of time. Your finance team, I can't tell you how many hours I have spent with finance groups just trying to figure out where the payroll numbers are going to hit every month, particularly when cash is king and you've got to really manage it properly. I've worked for some for-profit companies as well, where we did profit sharing, and that was also a place where you could miss it by just a couple $100,000 on 100 million ARR, and hiring can impact that a lot. And then for our own self-interest as TA leaders, it's a great way to objectively manage your team's performance for comparisons between each recruiter, setting goals for each recruiter, and how each recruiter is performing according to the workloads that they have. So it's a really easy, objective, data-driven way for everybody to understand where they stand against performance of the average on the team.
Amazing. Yes, that's great context going into sort of like, there's these terms that you're going to talk about and what they mean. Can you define these terms and how they fit into capacity modeling and planning?
Yeah, I thought this was an important thing to talk about first. So capacity is just the amount of how many recs your team can carry at any given time and actually cover properly. And a covered pipeline is something we're going to dive a little bit deeper to in a second here. but it means you have a forecast built out for what that job needs, like total candidates you need to either go find and source, converting to initial recruiter screens, and then converting through the pipeline on your average conversion rates as you expect. So you're driving to that hire date that's expected to hit in maybe 45 days, 60 days, 90 days, 100 days, but you are trending the right way with a healthy pipeline in order to have that job covered. And this goes back to recruiters managing like 15 recs at a time, which is, I've never seen it, but it's maybe it's possible for someone to do it, but you really can't cover 15 different recs at once. Something has to fall off, or some other team has to come in and supplement the work for that group. But this is really to manage to say, for everything you have open, you are maximizing out the pipeline as expected going forward. And then last, time to fill. This is one of measuring from the moment the position is opened until the accepted offer date. So that is measuring time to fill. Not time to hire, which is when the candidate enters and candidate either is rejected or accepts the offer. And then one more caveat I want to talk about for this presentation overall is that we're making some assumptions that a lot of this is in a healthy state. And if it's not, I highly encourage you to drive to get to that point. You're going to sometimes get a lot of resistance of legacy ways of operating and how people work. But in ensuring that you are ready to go to market with your role and then expect to hit that close date at a certain time is really critical to driving this process.
Yeah, there's definitely so much that recruiting teams can do at the forefront of opening a rec, and that hiring managers can do at the forefront of opening a rec to make sure that everything is set up for success. And I know that in the past, you have utilized Ashby for the covered pipeline aspect. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I think you were also going to show a little bit about how that means. I think it'll be really good for people to see visually what covered pipeline really means.
Sure. So if you want me to share, it's one thing we didn't practice here. Let me give 1 second here. All right, I'm just going to share my whole screen. Hopefully this will work out. Oh, there we go. I can share this individually. All right. Can everybody see this?
Yes, I can.
All right, great. All right. So this is the recruiting planning report in Ashby, which I have been an advocate and overuser of for about 2 years now. You can make this as complex as you want, segment it down by leveling, segment it by location. But the overall gist of this is you have an expected output of conversion rates for every single stage of your process all the way. So this is what you're expected on the average. Ideally, if you can beat it, it's great, but you don't want to fall below these. And I think particularly what I have focused on with teams in the past is at the final interview stage is that you want to hear it's about a 1 out of 4 people should be somebody that we want to move forward with an offer. And if we've gone through 5 interviews or 6 interviews and no one has made it an offer, that is a full stop to figure out where's the disconnect. Why are we not hitting this mark? Because there's so much time and effort to get to that stage. So this is what helps you as a TA leader to be able to manage what does healthy look like. And then down here, it actually breaks down weekly.
Sorry, quick question on that. Yeah. Do you think that, so I know in the recruiting planner, you can use historic data, which is great, but do you think that teams should go more conservatively, or do you think they should stay at the historic rate? Or like I've seen teams that want to kind of like go to an ideal state, which I typically advised against, because the ideal state is like maybe going to set you back.
Yes, 100%. If you're currently get a 60% offer acceptance rate, like, well, let's set it at 90. That's probably not the greatest idea. You're going to really struggle to hit that number. So you want to hit what your historic averages are. And thank you for pointing that out. You can actually pull this in by the job, by the level, by however you want to format it to put in your historic averages. And then down here gives you the weekly breakdowns. So this is on average every week what you should be seeing. 5 interviews for the hiring manager, 4 for on-sites, tech assessments, all the way through to offers in order to hit. And this has it set at 10 hires. Now, the thing that's important about start date and end date is you've got to ramp pipeline. So usually 2 to 3 weeks to ramp up pipeline to the full place where you're actually running it in a healthy way and meeting those targets. Like for an executive search, I like to have 20 active candidates at all times, because you're going to knock out almost half of them every week. So if you can constantly build up 20 and you get to that 20 point, it may take you 3 weeks to get to 20, and then you can really start to measure this and drive it forward. So this is what helps keep it on track and helps your recruiters to understand what good should look like, what my conversion rate should be in order to hit this hiring date, and go from there.
Quick point on this too, that so before I was in the role I'm in at Ashby, I was in a customer facing role where I was a rec ops consultant. And the thing that I always encourage folks to use, whether you do this in Ashby or you build this on your own, is even down to the on-site level or hiring manager call, it's easy to look at this capacity planning as recruiter capacity, but you can also look at the hiring manager call on the on-site and say, does your team, like let's just say the data science team, does your data science team have the resources to do this many on-sites a week? And then you really have to think about, like, it's not just about the recruiter's capacity, it's also about the hiring manager and the team's capacity. And will we be able to hit our hiring goals based off of your bandwidth? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, 100%. It's, if you have good continuity processes set up with your team, with good hiring guides, documentation, and handoffs, that when somebody's out of the office, they can keep all the trains moving while they're out. And I highly encourage you, if you're a team leader that doesn't do this and really focus in on this, allow your team to actually completely unplug when they're out of office, because you have continuity built in and everything set up. So really it does come down to the hiring teams, and especially as more and more companies are remote. You have team offsites that are out for a week. Typically hiring or interviewing capacity drops at like 90% during those offsites. You might get a few during the holidays in December. You typically see a 90% drop in capacity. So you've got to factor that in. And if they can't do, say, 5 screens in a week, how many can you do? I can do 3. Great. So then you just adjust the timeline to stretch it out to where they're hitting 3 a week. And thus they know that I'm not going to fill this job in 60 days. It's probably going to be more like 80.
Definitely. Anything else on this before we jump back into the slides?
Just that I love it. That's all.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Great last anecdote on that. Okay, let me get back to these. Okay, so talk about the capacity magic.
So where I was struggling to figure out how to do this was at a company that was profitable, that was doing profit sharing. We did have to really nail what we're going to hire every month to be able to figure out what our revenue and expenses were going to be. Top line, bottom line was what the bonus was, how the bonus was calculated. So I was just guessing. I was making some subjective guesses, like, well, we have this many people at the final stage, we're not quite sure. But in reality, what it was is the time to fill against the complexity of the hire. And leveling plays a big part into this, how long it takes you to do this overall, in order to build out a proper forecast and account for complexity. The tough part about this is when you have maybe a leader that just says, well, this person's filling 10 recs a quarter and this person's filling 5. It's like, well, they filled 5 directors and this person's filling 10 IC3s. So it's not really comparable. I would say the 5 directors is much harder. So it gives incentive also for your team to take on the hard ones, because you reward them for it and you can account for that in their overall production. The other piece too, for greenfield roles, I like to add 20% on the average time to fill for that position. So if you have an IC4 that you've never hired before, you look at your average IC4 hiring timeline and add 20, maybe even 30% to it, because you've got to go through that calibration process. So that's where you can also account for that and give people grace while they're figuring out what it is we need to hire. We're working on something brand new.
And by greenfield roles, that is like a net new type of role. Am I understanding that right? Okay, cool.
Yeah, we've never hired it before. We're still figuring out what it is.
Got it.
As you go through the screening process.
Great. There are a couple of contextual questions that might be helpful for the rest of the session. When you're referring, this is from Melissa Perez, when you're referring to recs in the capacity model, do you consider recs to be the number of unique roles or the number of headcount to fill? For example, would hiring 5 front-end developers be 5 recs or 1?
If they are, so how I quantify that is if you have the ability to share the exact same pipeline with the exact same interviewers, there's really not a big differential in capacity. you would look at that, and it's hard to do this. And if you're at volume to be able to do this, and I've had this a few times, is where you would open all 5 at once, all unique IDs, do all the interviewing against one, transfer that person to the unopened ones to the hiring process. That way, every time you hire, you're still taking down the average. So on average, when we hire 5, it takes us 65 days to go through it. And you still maintain your averages overall. But from a capacity perspective, top of the funnel is really where you see constraints in capacity. For TA, it's more about building that pipeline and driving that pipeline. It's more the interviewers in the back end, like can they sustain the pace that we can run and manage it properly. So if you're able to manage the same pipeline and also with the same interview panel, you can add quite a few recs to a recruiter because it doesn't make a huge difference overall.
Totally. One more question, and then we'll keep going through the slides. This is related to the recruiting planner, and you would love your take here. Can you see this in dashboard form? So the recruiting planner, for instance, 10 different roles tracked in real time through a recruiting plan that updates automatically.
Yep. You make a copy of this report, and you then put in your historical averages of where you're pulling this, and then you can segment out. And I've had this for like software engineers, all back-end engineers, 3, 4s, and 5s, what our expected outcomes are, how many we've hired, and then track that along the way to see how we're faring, and if any are behind. And I think what's really important, I haven't figured out how to do this. I'm going to talk to you guys about this, is to flag when we have had 5 interviews at the final round and no one has made it to offer. When you have 300 recs open at once as a team leader, it's hard to like pinpoint in unless you're just living in your data all day to notify you when things like that are happening, which is really fun to be able to get that ping and say, hey, lean in on this one, see what's going on here.
I can file that. I can file that feedback for you.
Feature request.
Feature.
I might have a few more before we finish. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so on getting started, can you walk through a little bit about what people need to get started ideally, and I guess what you might not need to get started?
You don't, let's see, what do you not need? It's similar to say what you do need. You just need to pull your average time to fill for your positions and however you want to segment it. You want to start off simply to build this out of just pulling in one team, one role, or maybe a few levels of that same role to start building this out and then test it, make sure it's working well. And then eventually you can start segmenting out if you want to do for go-to-market, engineering, product design, all of your teams that you're supporting, and be able to build out your capacity model, particularly if you're managing recruiters that have to support like 3 departments at once. This is always a tough challenge to manage prioritization. And if you say, all right, this is how much time this person has, how are we going to fill it, and work with the leaders to do that, it makes it much easier. If you don't have that data, or you don't have job levels. Job leveling is another piece. If you do not have job levels, you can just segment out by kind of your general years of experience for your roles. So 0 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6, like however you want to segment that, and then just use that as your guide to then start building your capacity model.
Yeah, it sounds like, so there's obviously companies that haven't been around that long and don't have that much data, but it sounds like you can still do it with like best guess estimates and other factors.
Yep, exactly. And again, you are making some subjective assumptions out the gate. So you're going to have to monitor this and tune it mostly by feedback from the recruiters, their overall performance and their recs, and is it too much or too little? Sometimes you can add even more than what you think you can to the team.
Right. Somewhat relevant question. How do you factor in everything that happens before a rec is opened live in time to fill timeline for capacity planning? That is everything from a role being approved and assigned, the intake meeting, hiring materials being finalized, etc. And that's a question from Melissa.
So this is where I have taken lots of arrows over the years by mandating that we get ready to go to market before we open the rec. And you'll get the manager that pings you, we've tried this a million times, just open it. We know what we're doing. And there's no plan. The skills assessment isn't prepared. We are quite sure what the market data is for the rec. So if you have the time, and not every company does, certainly you're in startups or in R&D roles where you just have to go. You can at least apply this to set boundaries around what it is that you need to hit from a pipeline perspective, and also try to defend your team's time along the way with expectations. One thing I did is in my skip levels with the recruiters, and then also with the TA managers, is always go through on our weeklies and the monthlies for just checking in to see if it's working. What are the next 2 recs you're opening? So they already know what's coming up next for them. And so as they're coming to the finish line for one, they've kicked off just passively the process for the next. As you start doing this, there's not going to be a lot of difference in all the positions that you're hiring. Once you write it out once, you have everything documented, you can just copy it, rebuild it, just customize it, and then go. So there is that time to launch to get there. What we're really measuring is what we have control over to manage and drive. So we want to understand, once we're ready to go to market, are we actually hitting the date we said we're going to close it? So we've got to do all the prep work ahead of time. And you can do that proactively as you know what's coming up next. And you have these conversations with leaders. And it's also nice to call out to say, hey, this one's up next week, and we have nothing from this hiring manager on what this role is. And really create some pressure on them if everyone's working together to say, get your homework done, get your job description written, get your hiring plan written out, assessments ready, and let's go hire.
Amazing. Okay, gonna zoom through this last slide so that you can jump into your own demo for folks who have to drop at the 30. And this kind of actually goes into the demo, creating your capacity model. Walk us through this a little bit, and then I know that you'll walk us through it visually on a spreadsheet. So very simply, I suggest you start with just one team and a team that has a lot of hiring, so that you have a lot of shots on goal to tune this model. Start with the lowest level position that you hire, and then work your way in a comparison up and up as you go. So if you start at, say, IC2s, or where's your IC2 and plus, because emerging talent's handled by another team. So you're taking IC2 and you just ask a very simple question. If a recruiter is working on nothing but this position all quarter, how many should they be able to fill? And this is more of a calibration exercise to say, they could probably fill 1 a week. Great. Now they're working on 3s. How many can they fill? 4s. You ask that same question, we do that comparison. Next to it, you also have your time to fill, so that you can actually put in some data attributes to what it is you're deciding. You also find that time to fill is not typically linear. You have, oh my gosh, AC just turned on in here. Do you still hear me okay? Yeah.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, I did.
Oh man, this thing is powerful. Okay. If I freeze to death, it's not my connection. You don't typically see linear progression of IC2 to IC3. It's not like each one is 20% higher. Each one typically goes up exponentially, where an IC2 may take you 20 days and a director takes you 120 days. So there's this just graph that just kind of goes this way. And then you can account for that in the model as well.
Perfect. Okay, I will let you take over the steering wheel here and get into your visual of how you do this.
All right. Here we go. All right. I cannot see anything except the spreadsheet. So if you need me, you can say something. All right. So this is how you start. So anybody who has been a manager under me in the past has gone through this with me. It may look very familiar. Put out all your levels that you're working on, put all your days to fill, and then this is where you segment out how many hires per quarter, if the recruiter is just working on this one position, that they can fill every quarter.
Sorry, JT,
this is the fun
part. Yeah, can you talk a little bit louder?
Yeah, I apologize.
No, that's okay.
I've been working here a lot. I've never heard this.
And that's okay. And this is where, like, on the days to fill, that's where you would make a guess, your best guess, if you didn't have the data readily available to you.
Correct. Yeah. Just segment it out here and just put in where on average you think you're landing, and overestimate if you're not 100% sure, and make it easy for yourself so that you can build this out properly. This is the part that's very subjective. I've done all kinds of permutations of the numbering scheme here. However, the simpler you make it, the better, I have found. So I've done like 1, 3, 6, 9, like all kinds of different ways to do it. But you want to establish a point system. You can pick any number to start with. However, I recommend a single digit low number. points here for 2. So if you look at the comparison of a 3 to a 6, it takes 50 days. We can solve 6. 3s and 4s are kind of similar. So we're going to make them each a 4. But they're twice as hard as an L2. It takes twice as long to fill. So we're making the points reflect that. An L5 takes about 30% about 30% longer. So we're going to make that a 6. An L6 takes about 30% longer. We're making that an 8.
And quick question of clarification from the question section. This says department, but is that level or like
oh,
job?
I'm sorry. Yeah, that should be level.
Okay, cool.
Thank you for calling that out. Yeah, it's level. And then you can segment this out by department. I was going to make this a lot more complex, but I watered it down a bit here. So once you have this set, you can then look at this and see, I've got a recruiter with 3 IC2s open or 5 IC2s and 3 3s, and they've got 22 points worth of recs. Whereas one that has 2 IC6s and 4, so they're managing less recs, but there's 32 points worth of work here, meaning it's a lot more complex, a lot more difficult rec load to manage and fill. So you can just see here how the comparison is working already to be able to quantify how hard the job is to get done.
And is the idea that recruiters maintain fairly equal, barring like projects and other things like that where they may need a reduced rec load?
Yeah, I think you look at what a good rec load looks like to actually cover pipelines. I've seen usually it's about 5 to 6. You can go up to 7 or 8. And on average, if you're really getting quite efficient at what you're doing, for the lower level positions, if you're just hiring like SDRs or support folks all day, you can actually push that pretty high and start building that out much higher. You can also segment out if you have principal recruiters can handle 32 points, whereas a level 2 recruiter can handle 20. And so you can segment it that way. But I haven't really done that because I'd rather encourage my team to do as much as they can, as much as they feel like they can do, than to say, well, you're an IC2, you should only have 20 points. If you can carry 30 and kill it, go. I wouldn't care.
Definitely. A couple of sort of logistics questions in the chat. Using this example, are you creating a tab per recruiter for the point system?
No, and I'll show you on the next tab here what that looks like. So what you do is you now have your rec list. And I just made this up, very simple. Software engineers 2 through 6 randomly put in here the job level that they are so that we can just ensure that we're tracking the point value correctly, and then the point value associated to every position, and then the recruiter assigned to every role. So this may be like a sprint for the quarter that we're running on. We have 3 recruiters to fill it. So we can open up this many positions, or it's like 17 positions at once that we can count here, and then just segment it out to say how many does Jim, Dwight, and Pam have overall. So total recs, total points for each, and how many do they have open, and then how many points do they have open? There it goes. How many points worth do they have open at any given time? So if we want to keep everybody level, currently we've got everybody at 66 points with this many positions open, but we need to move a little faster. So can we pump up a few more for them? So we're going to have Jim open this one and Dwight open that one, and they're at an even higher level. But what's really interesting to see is Pam is like working on director levels. She has 3 roles at almost an equal point value as Jim and Dwight with 10 and 6 respectively. So you can really quantify out the difference between having 10 of mostly IC2s for Jim, Dwight's got mostly IC4s, and Pam's got 4, 5s, and 6s that she's working on, and be able to see this. The other nice part about this too is if you get handed more positions and you've got capacity coming up, you can immediately look at your entire team and see who's got the bandwidth, who's got things that are about to close, or we can start handing things off to, or moving all the chess pieces around to properly load balance the team. Down here where you can see that, where we can move that stuff around. So that's how I would typically look at it and manage it, not make it too complex, but just kind of give you a overall snapshot of what each person is carrying and how well they're doing against it. The other side of this too is sometimes these numbers need to fluctuate. If somebody is working on a project that they need to pull down capacity, you can cap capacity, say we need to cap capacity at 18 for the next 2 months because they're working on another project. You can easily manage that here and defend that here in doing so.
Amazing. The hot question in the questions tab is, are you willing to share this template?
Sure.
Okay. I'll make sure that I get a copyable copy, and I will send that out in the post email. A couple of other questions that have come up, mostly about the point system. So, hold on. There's lots of questions coming in. Let me scroll back. Audrey was wondering if you could talk more about the point system, and then there was another question about points that was how do you take this point system, which is awesome, by the way, said Aiden, and determine what the max recruiter capacity is. And Audrey, I'm not sure what your specific question was, but hopefully this answer will help with that.
All right. So how to determine max capacity is where you just kind of have to draw a line in the sand and see if it's working. So if, and this came about when I had a recruiter that was running like 14 recs at once of kind of the similar job, data scientists, data engineers. And they were filling 6 roles a quarter. We brought that down to 5 or 6 at a time, and they filled 12 the next quarter because they had the time to actually focus, build relationships with candidates, address roadblocks, things that they needed to tackle and challenge throughout the way or along the way. So it's really about what, again, kind of down to the subjectivity, how it's going, checking in with the recruiters. How's the 6 recs working? Is capacity working well? Are the recs getting covered? Is the pipeline getting covered? How is it going? So this is just where you have to lean in and get this tuned out. I would say 6 months is the most probably you need to really calibrate. You'll start to see patterns after a while where the total point values of what you can have open at any given time start to normalize. And you also start to see the number of recs filled every month or every quarter start to normalize. So I've read it, for all the recs we had open, we would fill about a third of them every month. And we could look at the forecast that way, say, all right, if we need to fill 30 this month, I need to have 90 open. Do we have 90 capacity? And be able to push it that way. So it makes it pretty easy once you've got this running for a while to kind of hover above all of it and understand what the health of the team is against what the business is demanding for you.
Amazing. Anything else? There's a slew of questions. Is there anything else you wanted to show? I know there's a couple more tabs.
I think
which this is like maybe kind of relevant to the tabs in general. Do you share this? Let me get to the exact question. I'm scrolling.
I share this with the team so everybody sees what everybody has. And I share this with leadership as high up as they are interested in, or I need their help to do prioritization. And I've got a prioritization example in the last tab here.
Okay, perfect.
Or pardon me, in the next tab. Yeah. So if you look at another example of how to run this, this is a place where you can, again, look at what everyone's capacity is, what everyone's working on. And then down below, you have basically a line to say, we can open on average 72 points at any given time. So as recs close, you can look down here and see, all right, what's coming up next? How many points are available? And then have them set the priority. The business wants them filled in this order as to next to be open. They may not be filled in that order, but they're the next to run because you're not going to fill an IC 5 faster than you're going to fill a 3 open at the same time. So it's just a matter of this level sets with the leadership team and all the other hiring managers to say, here's the queue, here's where you are in the queue. We expect to open your rec. And it gets pretty cool that you can actually say, we're probably going to open your rec at the end of this month. We will have capacity to do it. And that kind of eases them a bit in order to be patient to be ready for you when you're ready for them. And then last year, this is another example of an actual occurrence that happened where at a company, I was given a headcount plan to hire 200 folks the next year. And I said, well, what does that look like? What levels? So I just transposed what we hired last year, what percent of each of these departments are 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, into what this model would look like for continuing the averages of what we hired in the past. Same goes for attrition, of just monitoring the attrition and seeing how we're seeing where the attrition falls per level, per department, per team. You can do this however much of a micro scale you want to. But in general, they wanted 120 positions filled in the first half of the year, which meant we're really accelerating out production. And in reality, with the team that we had, and also the leveling had increased on average. We wanted to hire more directors, more managers, senior managers. We weren't going to hit that number. And so I said, baseline, we would hit 90 based on this. We would probably hit 100 or so, but the more that you bring down leveling and segment out or push out to the second half or into Q3, what you need to hire, the faster we're going to hit it. So I reported to the CFO, presented the CFO. A day later, we were at the CEO. A day later after that, we were with the entire executive team, recalibrating what the ask is and down leveling some roles, pushing off some roles. But we got it down actually to 95. And then we ended up filling 110. So we actually exceeded the forecast, but there was no way we were going to hit 125, which would have been some critical hires for the initiatives for those executives that have gone unfilled. So it was a good way to get in front of that, to say, don't see how this can happen unless I hire more people. But even if I hire more people, they won't be productive for another probably 2 months. So we're not going to hit this number. We got to find another way to get there. And I was working with a great executive team that listened and was willing to work with that. And everybody was happy at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think this model what really helps hiring managers and executives visualize what is possible. And it's kind of like a classic pipeline thing, like that sales and marketing have had access to for a long time and have presented to leadership for a long time, where they have all the numbers, and recruiting historically just hasn't had these things built out for one reason or another. And as recruiting teams have the tools to become more strategic, this is just such a good visualization for them. There's a couple of nuances that I wanted you to cover. So one is about measuring time to fill for evergreen roles. So for example, I'm not sure if their name is pronounced Anastasia or Anastasia, but they asked, how do you go about measuring time to fill for evergreen roles? We need to hire 5 people with the same profile. I think you answered this a little bit, but the time to fill part, I don't know if it was covered.
Sure. If you never close a rec, you can never measure your time to fill. So if you've got to just copy the rec and open up, I prefer 1-to-1 ratios always. If you're doing a sprint like this, you take one or open up all 5 at once, do all your recruiting against one, and then transfer those hires to each rec as you get to the offer, close those out as you go. And that's going to maintain your average of time to fill for that position. So you're going to fill the first one and very quickly, the next one's not going to be too far off. You'll see that I've normally seen when you do sprints like that. And if you're doing there's one that we had to hire 250 engineers in 6 to 9 months. We would open them in cohorts of 20. So 20 at a time. The team eventually was scaled to the point where we were hiring 1.3 people a day. And so as that went on, we just opened up 20, filled them out, next 20, filled them. And then we would look at those cohorts and see how much faster we were getting cohort to cohort.
I think we have time for one and a half-ish questions before we have to wrap up. So the other nuances are related to maybe sourcing, or if a team has sourcers, and then the other one was about agencies. So Melissa had asked, in a structure where recruiters aren't doing recruiter screens, so eliminating that time spent interviewing, how do you determine capacity? Kind of same with sourcers, and then also same with agencies. If you have an agency working on a rec, how do you kind of play around with that?
Unless you're able to forecast out how many people you're expecting to see from that agency of quality, you really can't run this. I'm sorry to say for our agency friends out there who are like, oh, how do I play a part in this?
Right.
You have to be a great partner just to hold yourself accountable to that, to say, look, We know on average, our conversion rate to outreach is 30%. So we need 30 candidates. We need to reach out to 100 people. Thus, those 30 candidates I expect to be in the pipeline by the end of 3 to 4 weeks. So if you have a relationship with an agency in that way, you can still do this where they are riding alongside side with you in this process. But overall, you really have to own top of funnel and be sure that you're putting that in, not only from the outbound sourcing side, but also factoring in your inbound conversion rates and seeing where that is. I think having a sourcer is a privilege, particularly in this market. And if your conversion rate is greater than 5%, you probably shouldn't have a sourcer. You're going to get enough applicants over the next 3 weeks to make a hire. Mm-hmm. So it's really leaning in on the places where you have to go find people, where they're not going to apply to you, and building that forecast out for top of funnel before they convert to candidate.
Amazing. We are coming close to time. JT, if it's okay with you, I might direct folks to you if we didn't answer their question.
Yeah.
Okay. And they can find you on LinkedIn. Is that right?
That's great. Yeah. And give me some time because I'm not on there all day. And
okay.
I actually, even after the podcast, I got lots of questions, and I over the last couple of days, I've been answering as many as I can. But yeah, happy to help out anywhere I can with folks.
Hopefully this answers some. I will send you the recording link so that you can send that to folks too. But as we sort of wrap up here, I hope everyone had some valuable insights that they can take away back to their role for capacity modeling. If you enjoyed this webinar, hope that you'll give the Ashby LinkedIn page a follow. We do monthly webinars, thought leadership webinars, and much more valuable content. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us today, including you, JT. Your insights are so valuable to the community. We will be sending out an email follow-up with the replay in case anyone wants to review the demo again. And JT also shares more like high level insights and I think we'll answer some of the questions that folks had on his offer accepted podcast. If you are interested in this type of content, would highly recommend you subscribe to that as well. If you have any questions or concerns, feedback on topics you want to see in the future, always feel free to reach out to me.
Thanks, Shannon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.